Let's talk about commitment escalation in cybersecurity. So, first of all, what is commitment escalation? It's a bias. When you are making a continuous investment, whether it's in a project or in a business or in anything else, a lot of time, when we stop and analyze whether to continue the investment, we think that the sunk cost play a huge role into whether you should be investing or not. Same in cybersecurity. If you think about it, let's say, for example, you are implementing new application security posture management system. And for example, we're talking about the implementation costs, including the initial 3-year licensing of about $2.5 million, with the total cost of ownership at around $6 million. All of a sudden, 6 months into the implementation, your current implementation costs are already at $3.5 million, will require additional $2 million of investment, and the total cost of ownership is rising to about $8 to $9 million. What are you going to do? Are you going to continue the investment? Are you going to pause the project? Are you going to switch to a different solution? The answer is it depends. But obviously, this is where your commitment escalation bias is going to kick in. So that's why it's extremely important to keep controlling this bias and be aware of this bias, because when we're aware of this bias, we're much better at controlling it. Why is it so frequent that commitment escalation is happening in cybersecurity? Well, one of the main reasons is when we're analyzing our project and we tend to think about, for example, return on investment of a security project. Well, the problem is in cybersecurity, there are multiple ways to calculate the ROI. And when there are multiple ways to calculate the ROI, and when those calculation methods are going to give you completely different results, it's really hard to understand whether you truly should continue the investment or your commitment escalation bias has just kicked in. So, what are the methods of controlling this? What are the methods for you not to invoke your commitment escalation bias? Well, first of all, think about total cost of ownership. Total cost of ownership is a great way to do a financial analysis for something where the ROI is unclear. And when you're doing the total cost of ownership analysis on security solutions or security projects, a lot of time you're going to have multiple options: option A, option B, option C. And there might be certain gateway, the certain gate point where if your option A starts overrunning, going over the cost, you may be better off switching to option B or option C rather than continuing with the option A. So make sure you're aware of those, make sure that you have those checks. The other thing is, when we're talking about more generic cybersecurity projects, more generic cybersecurity programs in the organization, think about security monitoring, for example, a lot of time thinking about risk quantification, the dollar figures behind the risks, is a much better way of analysis than doing the return on investment. And this, again, this is where if you see that the risk quantifications, the dollar amounts behind the risks that you're trying to reduce or maybe even eliminate, and you are looking at the project that's going to do it, and you see that the cost is clearly going to overrun the dollar amount of the risk, maybe it's a point where you should stop. Obviously, it's unpleasant for us, as in cybersecurity, we want things to happen. We understand how important it is to protect the organization, and we want to make sure that we're protecting the organization. But sometimes we need to know where to stop in order to be successful. And the last thing, if you really want to think in terms of return on investment, then this is where you have to understand whether you are aligning with certain business objectives in pursuing specific opportunities, and whether those costs justify your program supporting that opportunity and supporting that particular business area. Because this is where you can say, hey, you know what, given the fact that the return on investment of overall, let's say, business expansion program is going to be $3.5 billion, and we're looking at a security cost that went from $3 million to $5 million, and overall total cost of ownership from the security perspective just going up maybe to $10 million, you're still fine. You're still fine from a business perspective because you're supporting specific opportunity which has a very clear return on investment. But otherwise, you probably want to think about the risk quantification, and you want to think about the total cost of ownership. So make sure that you're aware of the commitment escalation bias and do not make that mistake.